Hey guys, so with the end of the year coming up, I have been looking over and thinking back through my year of reading and trying to put together a list of all the books that have really shaped me throughout this year. I've read 140-ish so far this year. I'll get a couple more before the end of the year, but I wanted to get this video out and I want to give you guys just some ideas for books that you can check out. I've got a ton here. I've got 24. Funny enough, 24 for 2024, but just across all different genres and stuff. And so hopefully there's something in here that you like. I'll have links for everything in the description that you can go to the timestamps and that you can purchase these. Those are affiliate links, so they help the channel out if you appreciate what I'm doing here. So without any further ado, let's get into it. The first two that I want to mention, I don't have physical copies of, but the first one is called The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu. This is the first in a series called The Dandelion Dynasty, and I've still only read this first book, but this book really stuck out to me because it's an epic fantasy novel, but this first one especially is written kind of as a collection of short stories almost. And it was just fascinating because I haven't really read... I've read some short stories, but I've never read a novel that was written as a collection of short stories. And so I'm really excited to finish the rest of this series because most people say like this series is unbelievably amazing, but the first book is the hardest one to get through. And so I read the first book and I'm like, dude, I love this. This was so good. Like this was amazing. And so I cannot wait to dig into the rest of the books in 2025. But yeah, The Grace of Kings by Ken Liu, that was one of my favorite novels that I read this year. The second one that I don't have a physical copy of yet is The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. And this book just blew my mind. It's an examination of how there's this crazy thing that we can see in the statistics now of people who went through adolescence in 2010 to 2015. And we look at all the charts and all the data that we have now, and there's just this skyrocketing increase in everything bad, right? In self-harm, in medication, in depression, in anxiety, in absolutely everything bad. Like it just skyrockets. Minimums like increase of 100%. Most of them are like 300+%, right? And so it's Jonathan looking at all this data that we have now and trying to come up with a hypothesis of like, why did this happen? What was it about these years that make these numbers just skyrocket? And what he comes down to is this hypothesis that this was the first instance of what he calls the greatest experiment in all of human history, which was giving children cell phones. This happened right after cell phones became kind of just synonymous with everyday life. And these people in this generation were the first ones to be raised in what he calls a phone-based childhood versus a play-based childhood. And he makes a incredibly compelling case for that being the primary reason why we saw so many unbelievable spikes in negative things for this generation and in all the problems that generation has faced. And so it was an unbelievably interesting book and very, very, very important book, like required reading for anybody who's raising kids now, anybody who's a grandparent, anybody who's a teacher, like any kind of the stuff, this message that we do not understand what this technology does to developing minds. And the best understanding that we have now is looking back at this data, and it's not good. And it should make you very, very cautious of what age you are allowing children to this technology and stuff. And so this was just incredibly compelling and incredibly interesting book. Definitely one of my favorites of the whole year. So moving on from that though, now we've got this giant stack of books. So I'm going to start with the biggest one that I have here, just physically, which is The Legendary Hunts of Theodore Roosevelt. This was a gift to me from my dad for Christmas last year. And this guy, John Siri Lester, is an artist. And so he had paintings that he has in here. I'm trying to get so you can see that. This is one of my favorite ones. I'm a Rocky Mountain boy to the end of my days, and I love elk hunting. But it's basically just a collection of all of the hunts that Teddy Roosevelt went on. He was a massive conservationist, massive hunter, and John Siri Lester made all these paintings of it. And I loved this book because as I've been maturing, as I've been growing, God's been exposing me to beauty in other arenas where I never noticed it before. And art is one of those things. Art is one of those things that I'm growing in my appreciation of the beauty of art. And this book was just the perfect thing because the subject of the art is already something that I'm massively interested in. Teddy Roosevelt is one of my favorite people. All of his hunts in the West, hunting just in general, but then so many of his hunts were in the West, which is just where my heart is. Like all of that just aligned to just perfectly be this thing to ignite this understanding and this love of the beauty of art. And so this book was just absolutely one of my favorites. It's one of my favorite coffee table books. The pictures are stunningly gorgeous, and just such a great one. Moving on from that, I'm going to do two of these at the same time because they're both Louis L'Amour's. Louis L'Amour is, I'm working on a full video about him. He, in my opinion, is one of the greatest authors who has ever lived. And I've got a lot of reasons for why I would say that. But this year, I read the entirety of the Sacketts series, which is kind of his main series. There's 17 books in that. I've read a gajillion of his other books, but I'd never read the Sacketts series all the way through from start to finish. And it's basically his stories of a family that came to America pre the Pilgrims, pre all of that, and then all the way through the end of the Civil War and all of this. And it's this story of the founding of America through the eyes of this one family. And so the Sacketts series is unbelievably good. And Louis L'Amour is probably the best. What the idea that I'm rolling around in my head right now is that I would be tempted to say that these are the best stories of manhood ever written. And I'm not entirely sure if that's what I'm going to go with yet, but it's real close to what I'm going to go with. He was an astoundingly amazing author. And really that comes from this next book that I have, which is Education of a Wandering Man, which is his memoir. And what made Louis L'Amour so unique is that he was one of these people. There's Malcolm Gladwell wrote a book called Outliers and talking about how there's just this perfect confluence of events for someone to be an outlier, someone to be a Bill Gates, someone to be a Steve Jobs. And that's what Louis L'Amour was. He was this perfect confluence of events and place and time and all this to become just one of the greatest Western writers of all time because of his life experience. And so this book, reading Education of a Wandering Man, just blew me away and made me just respect and look up to Louis L'Amour so much more than I had even before, just enjoying his stories. Like the man's philosophy, the man's way of thinking, what he did in his life, how he did stuff was just absolutely awesome. So this was easily one of my favorite memoirs that I've ever read. And so that reading the Sacketts, Louis L'Amour is just, he's just the man. He's so good. Next up, we have A Sharp Compassion by Chase Repelge. I did a full video about this, so you can watch that. This is the most important book that I read in 2024. It is about how Jesus will risk offending us in order to heal us. And if you want to know way more about this, just watch this video. So I'm not going to say that much about it here, but it is without a doubt the most important book that I read last year. And it is a book that I think is required reading for every Christian today, period. I would love to have just cases of this and give it away to everyone. It is a difficult book. It is a difficult message. And if you are not ready for it, you'll hate it. I would say that. But it is unbelievably powerful and so good. Check out this video. I'll talk a lot more about that one in there. Next up, we have Mr. Midshipman Hornblower. I picked this one up from the Memoria Press, which is what we use some of our homeschool stuff from. And one of the guys there had mentioned this. I picked it up and I was like, this is going to be one of my favorite series of all time. C.S. Forester is a brilliant writer, absolutely brilliant. The second book in this series is the second book about Hornblower, but it is written from someone else's point of view, which is like astounding to me. It's just like it's this whole magical realm of show don't tell, and his writing is astoundingly good. But more than that, the morality and the masculinity of the characters inside of here, like you read this book and you're just like, I just want to be a better man. Like I just have to be better. So I made a full video about this one too, so you can check that out up there. Moving on, we have, let's go with The Body Keeps the Score by Bessel van der Kolk. Very difficult book, very, very heavy, difficult book, but unbelievably insightful book about trauma, about how the body itself, your physical body, stores the traumatic things that happen to you until you deal with it. And until you know what you know and until you feel what you feel, your body will exhibit the repercussions of the trauma that you have gone through. And so this is a book all about that. It's like one of the foundational texts of how to deal with trauma and help people heal from trauma. And very heavy. I mean, it's just stories of people's trauma and this guy working through them with them. But so good, so life-changing book. Really, really gave me a lot of insight and a lot of good ideas and stuff on how to help people through things as we are ministering to people in our life and working through stuff from our own life and our own past. So yeah, absolutely love that one. Next up, let's go The Big Leap by Gay Hendricks. This book introduced the concept of upper limiting to me, which is essentially this idea that there's a certain level where you are comfortable with being happy and being filled with joy and all this stuff. And when stuff starts to go too well, you make something happen to bring yourself back down to a level that you're more comfortable with. You upper limit yourself. You're not comfortable feeling as positive and as full of joy and as whatever. And so you do a thing to bring yourself back down to a normal kind of operating sense where you're like, well, I mean, yeah, it kind of sucks to be depressed all the time, but I like know how to be depressed all the time. And so I'm going to do that, because it's more comfortable and it's really weird to be excited and be happy and have vision and all this stuff. So unbelievably powerful idea that has stuck with me and changed me throughout the whole entire year. This idea of upper limiting. Really, really powerful. I liked this book a lot. I listened to it first from the library and then ended up getting it, and Kim is reading it right now. It has been a powerful tool to kind of help work through stuff in our life. Next up, Teaching from Rest. This is a super short one. Kim read it. It's a homeschooler's guide to unshakable peace. Kim read it, asked me to read it with her, and it is one of these books that's like, you should just read it every year. It's super short, especially if you homeschool. It's super short. And the core message of it is something that God's been working out in me in a whole bunch of other different ways, but it's essentially this idea that what you do can never be separated from how you do it and why you do it. What is always built on a foundation of how and why. And so when we start to think that that's not the case, we believe this lie that it doesn't really matter how I'm doing the thing, or it doesn't really matter why I'm doing the thing. As long as I do the right thing, I'll get the results that I want. And this is just a massive kick in the pants of like, no, you won't. Like, it matters how you do it and it matters why you do it. And if the how and the why is right, then the what has a whole lot of leeway. But you have to be teaching your kids and raising your kids, and in this case, homeschooling your kids, from a place of rest, from a place of genuine love towards them, from a place of surrender, and knowing that you can't teach them everything that they need to know, and you're going to have to choose, what to cut out and what to not, and all this stuff. But just such a grace-filled kick in the pants of like, hey, here's the reality. Make sure your what and your why are right. And then, your how and your why are right. And then the what will figure itself out. You can work through all that. So really, really excellent short book, but super powerful and brought a lot of unity to us in our homeschooling. Keeping with the trend of parenting stuff, Habits of the Household, Justin Whitmel Early. I made another video about this book. I loved this book, and primarily the thing that has stuck with me from this book is this idea where he talks about, when I have the opportunity where I really need to parent my kid, like the situation comes up and it's a situation where they really need my parenting, like my actual guidance, my actual working through stuff with them, I don't want to do it. It never comes at a convenient time. They never need me as a parent at a convenient time for me. They never want to have a talk in the middle of the day when I have all kinds of time. They want to have a talk at 8:45 at night when I'm trying to, put them in bed. And it's just this whole reminder of like, but if I say no in those times, if I choose just to try to do behavior modification or just ignore it or just whatever, I'm not actually stewarding the responsibility of parenting the kids that God gave me. And so I really, really loved what he had to say in here. And like I say, that has just stuck with me so much. It's like, I don't want to do the work of parenting, but no one else is going to do it. Either I do it or it's not going to get done. And either I do it when it needs to be done or it's not going to matter. Right? So Really like that one, Habits of the Household. We'll go back to another fiction, Wendell Berry's Jayber Crow. This is one of the most impactful novels I have ever read. It is not that big. It's 350 pages or whatever. It took me a month and a half to get through this book because I would just read a chapter and then just be like, I can't read anymore. I have to sit with everything that he just said in there. Like I have to let my brain process what he just said. And it's the beauty of it is that it's not that I have to sit and process because it's so complicated I can't understand it. It's so simple that anybody could understand it, but it's so profound that you could sit here and mull on it for hours and still not get through all the depths of what he's saying in here. And so this was definitively one of my favorite novels of all time. It wrecked me. It absolutely wrecked me. And if you haven't read it, you absolutely have to. It's so, so good. Next up, I just finished this book the other day. This We Believe, The Good News of Jesus Christ for the World. This is a required purchase for anyone who is a believer to have in their library. Basically, what happened with this was a whole bunch of evangelical guys getting together and saying, hey, across all these denominations, across all these differences that we have on the minors of things, and the minor points and secondary points and all this, what is it that we all agree upon and that we can all agree with that are the majors? What makes the gospel the good news that it is? Like, what is that, right? And so they went into it with this idea of centuries ago, it was truly said that in things necessary, there must be unity. In things less than necessary, there must be liberty. And in all things, there must be charity. We see all these gospel truths as necessary. So this was just a wonderful dive into these are the things that make up the gospel. And if you think something other than these things, you're not thinking or preaching the gospel. Like, this is across denominations, across all these other ideas, across people that may disagree vehemently on secondary things. Nobody disagrees with this. And if someone is preaching something other than this, they're not preaching the true gospel. So it's really just become apparent to me in a lot of different conversations with different people in my life is like, there's a lot of people that don't understand some of these very basic tenets of the gospel. And they're so caught up in the secondary things and in the minor things that they've never actually worked through understanding the major things, and they have major misunderstandings about the majors, which is a problem. So absolutely love this one. Such a great resource, and really, really just, I think they nailed it out of the park. They have so many people that have, signed onto it and agreed with it and been like, yes, like that. No one's going to disagree with that. That is the core of the gospel of Jesus Christ. And so loved that one. Another one is Dream to Destiny by Robert Morris. This is a study of the life of Joseph, and it has been kind of profoundly speaking to so many things in our life, but then also in the life of people that I see around me. He breaks everything up into a bunch of different tests that he correlates to the life of Joseph, with the pride test, the pit test, the palace test, the purity test, the prison test, the prophetic test, the power test, the prosperity test, the pardon test, and the purpose test. You can tell he's a pastor. But really, really great dive into Joseph's story and pulls principles out of it that I feel like have resonated in my own life and in other people's stories. When I look at it, I'm like, oh yeah, this framework works. Like, this applies really well. This is kind of a very universal thing of when God gives you a dream, what kind of happens next and what you can expect to experience next. And so really enjoyed this one. After that, I just finished this book yesterday. This is The Gift of Tears by Corey Russell. I just wept reading it. It's everything that God is doing in my life right now. And if you feel like you need it, you need it. That's all I'll say about that one. All right, what do we got next? The Prosperous Coach by Steve Chandler and Rich Litvin. This is a book that God massively has been using to work belief in me of the next season of life of what he wants me to do with work. This is one of those things where you have an idea in your head of what is possible or what is not possible, I should say. And for me, this book opened up my mind to what is possible with people that are able to coach people and make a living coaching other people into better understanding, into insights of themselves and their work and all this kind of stuff. And this book just unleashed this whole realm of like what could be possible with what I feel like God's calling me to do for work. And so this was a very, very profoundly changing book. I listened to it. I read it again. I'm about to read it again. And it's been really, really good. That same trend of work stuff, Cal Newport's newest book, Slow Productivity, The Lost Art of Accomplishment Without Burnout. Cal has shaped my working more than almost anyone else. And this newest book just kind of brought everything home, lining up with this other book, how God's working in all this of my ability and how he wants me to utilize that in the world. And this was just hugely encouraging book of, again, stories of other people who have lived this way and who work this way and who, understand the value of working like this. Next up, David McCulloch, The Pioneers. I just picked this one up kind of randomly. I found it at the library and was like, sweet, yeah, I like David McCulloch. Like, I'll read it. This is great. This book just blew me away with the men that it talks about in here. Again, this is kind of a theme here. The guys that he talks about in here were just incredible examples of everything that I want to be, of guys that were so accomplished. One of the things that they did seems like a lot to modern day guys, and they did like 15 of those things. You know, it's like they were incredible artists, and they were all polymaths, they were all self-taught, they were all incredible thinkers and all this stuff. And it just shows this level of human capacity that just is massively inspiring to me. So I made a individual video about this one as well. You can check that out if you want to learn more about this one. Next up, we had another reread for me, which was Extraordinary by John Bevere. This book fundamentally changed some very big pieces of how I understand the gospel and how I understand the Spirit of God living inside of me and working out in me. I read it 4 or 5 years ago and then read it again this year and had just as many giant revelations from it. John Bevere is one of my favorite Christian writers. And this book just put some pieces together for me. And then Kim read it this year and same thing of just like, how did I never know this? How did I never understand this before? How did I never see this before? And really fundamentally shifting some stuff in my understanding of what it means to walk out life as a Christian. So loved that one. Dang, man, down to the last 5. Okay, sweet. Well, let's do this one. So Night Angel Nemesis by Brent Weeks. This one I put on this list because of my experience with it. What happened with this book was I was reading it from the library, reading and listening to it, and I did not like it. I was just like, I don't like this. This is stupid. This is dumb. I don't like it. It's failed. Brent Weeks failed me. I had such high expectations. I've loved all this other stuff, and I just don't like this book. And I finished it, and I was like, 2 stars, didn't like it. Like, it was just not my thing. And the day after that, I was out on a walk, and I was praying and I felt God be like, hey, you're like, you know that book, you know how you hated it? And I was like, yeah, and he was like, well, so the reason why you don't like it is because it's you, like you're him, like you're being him in this story. And I'm like, what? And then I sit there and I think about it and I'm like, oh my gosh, this is the whole reason why I don't like this story right now is because he's being a dumbass. And it's because it's convicting me of how I'm being a dumbass. And then all these corollaries fall into place. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is my life right now. And so I went and bought the book that I hated. I bought it. And overnight it changed from 2 stars to like 5 stars. I'm like, this is amazing. This is like, Brent Weeks is just a master of the craft and the art. And this is insane. Like his understanding of human psychology and all this stuff. It's like just insane. And I loved it. And so it was such a fun experience to just realize the power of fiction, right? And the power of these stories that can get inside of you and then open up something that's like, oh my gosh, I had no idea. Like I never knew that. So I made another video talking about this one. You can check that out up there, but that was Night Angel Nemesis. Next up, fourth from last, is the Word, how we translate the Bible and why it matters. This was quite possibly my favorite. I might do an awards video this year, but this was quite possibly my favorite nonfiction book that I read this whole year. Absolutely astoundingly interesting book about how we get Bible translations. I got on kind of the path of translation stuff from reading classics and understanding so many different translators and stuff on classics. And it's like, well, this version of Don Quixote is really dumb and stilted and I don't like it, but this version is amazing, And it's like, well, why can't it just say what it says? And it's like, well, you can't really make it say what it says. And I'm like, well, but then how does that work with the Bible? And it takes me down this whole path of understanding Bible translations. And it started with this book, and this book blew my mind and just unlocked the Bible to me in a way that it has never been in 36 years of my life. It was so good and will definitely be something that I go back and reread later on. Recommend it to everybody and anybody, especially if you're interested in Bible translation stuff. It's top-notch resource. 3 left. So 6 Types of Working Genius. This book revolutionized how I understand myself, how I understand how I work in a team, and the funny part was beyond that, it revolutionized how my wife and I work together in our marriage. I made a whole video about this one, so you can check that out. But yes, one of the most powerful frameworks that I've ever encountered, bar none. It's just so powerful and really has actively affected every single day of my life since I read this book. So love that one. Second to last, Gentleman in Moscow. I made a video about this one. The short and sweet of this is that I loved this book because when it first came out 4 years ago, my buddy read it. He absolutely loved it. And he goes, Paige, I was like, yeah, dude, should I read it? You loved it. We have pretty similar tastes, And he's like, nah, dude. He's like, you're not sophisticated enough. You won't appreciate it. And 4 years later, I find it at the library and I'm like, hey dude, what do you think? You still think I wouldn't like that book? And he goes, no, man, I think you'd like it now. I think you've grown and I think you've grown and expanded and I think you would appreciate it now. And sure enough, dude, I go to read it now and I'm like, man, if I had read this book 4 years ago, I would not have liked it at all. But I'm reading it now and I absolutely adore it. I cannot get enough of it. And it was such an awesome example of how as you read and as you intentionally live life, you grow and you change and you become someone different and things come unlocked to you that you couldn't access earlier in life, right? So I have a whole video delving into that. Check that out. Gentleman in Moscow. Amazing novel. And then finally, the last one, my big hunk of read from the year was this, the Founder's Bible. This is the NASB 95 text, I believe. So really fun because I'd never read the NASB before, the NASB, however you say it. And I absolutely love the NASB. But beyond that, the articles and everything inside of this particular Bible, I believe make this one of the most important books in my whole house. This book unlocked for me so much of what I've struggled with of people's explanations of America and it gets weird on the whole Christian nationalism thing and all this stuff. And I haven't been able to reconcile what people say about all this stuff. I'm like, I know like America had, a Christian founding. I believe that from what I've read and a bunch of the other stuff that says we didn't. I'm like, that doesn't really make any sense and whatever. But the documents in here, David Barton has one of the largest collections of original documents from the founding era. And what he shows in here that is just so beyond reproach is if you just look at these documents, you cannot but come to the conclusion that the founding of America was blatantly influenced and could never have happened without the Bible and without the incredible influence that the Bible had on all these men that created this system of government. And so everything that underpins the actual government of the US is so biblically based and biblically founded that you to try to take apart the two, like it just doesn't work. Like you cannot do it. And so it brought so much clarity to this tension in my head of like, how do you deal with what people say and with the truths of history and all this other stuff, but also with the fact of like that hands down, like America is the greatest country that has ever existed in the world. Like, and it has done more good. And there's like something just undeniably unique about America. And that was really the thing that I was trying to dig into and struggling with is like, yes, it is not perfect. And to say that America has always been a Christian nation in the meaning of, the majority of people have always been Christian. Like that's not even true. Right. And so it's like, but how do you reconcile all this with the fact that there's something uniquely different about America? Like it's uniquely different. Like something is different about this, and what is it and what makes it that way? And this book just brought so much clarity to that of like, it's the way that it was founded, and because of the systems and the undergirding of everything being, this was the first time in human history when all of the principles that God lays forth in the Bible for government, the founding of America was the first time that all of those principles were intentionally put together in a form of government that a bunch of people agreed upon freely, right? It was like the first experiment of trying to do government the way that God says to do it in the Bible. And that understanding bringing to light so much clarity on like, this is why America is unique, right? Because whether like we can argue all day long about how much good, not, but like what you can't argue about is that it is completely unique in the history of the world, right? And so to me, the explanation that he gives of why that is the case is the best, most powerful explanation. And it drastically changed so much of how I understand and look at our country and its history and everything that we've done, like all the good, all the bad, everything about it. So, so this book just absolutely blew my mind. I'm thinking about doing a dedicated video to it. I just haven't yet. There's so much there. I feel like it would be like a 7-hour video. But yeah, if you guys are interested in that, let me know. And maybe I will. So there you go. If you made it to the end, holy crap, type a comment and say, wow, that was a lot. If you made it all the way to the end here. That was $24. Hey, I don't know if anybody's even watching to the end, but the biggest thing for me is that explaining these books and talking through them helps cement them in my mind. So even if nobody watched the end, I got something good out of it. So if you are here though, leave me a comment, say, woo, that was a lot. And let me know what some of your favorite books from the year were. I would love to hear what you read. I'd love to hear what you loved, and add it to my ever-growing TBR. So yeah, I think that's all I got. I'll talk to you guys in the next one. Bye.